Allergy Friday. I'm Derrick Day, and he is,
I am Aaron Tomlinson.
and
Great to be.
Aaron is here, and we are glad that he's here.
Yeah,
You want to tell anybody why we're glad
yeah,
you're here?
yeah. So I posted a little bit to my Facebook page. So I had a birthday on last
Last
Friday,
Friday. hmm
last Friday, and woke up having a hard time breathing, and ended up going to the emergency room and spending, I don't know, 4 days in the hospital, I guess, while they
Yeah.
tried to figure out what was wrong with me. So sent me home to rest and on medication, and strict instructions not to drink right now while I'm on this medication. So what I
Boo.
have, what I have in the bottle tonight is Naked Green Machine.
Okay.
So
Are you,
I might be juicing for a while, but that's okay. It'll
no,
be good.
naked drinks are great, man. They're awesome,
Yeah,
and the Green Machine is one of the best ones.
yeah.
So me,
So
I'm not drinking anything even remotely healthy. Uh, Jack and Coke.
sounds good.
Yep.
But alas, I shall focus on getting healthier.
Okay. You know what would have been messed up is if you took a swig of that and spit it out like, God, this is disgusting.
Yeah, we should choreograph that ahead of time.
I guess that's always a good idea to try your drinks beforehand so that you don't get surprised on the air, right?
Right.
So anyway, we talked about a subject tonight and for tonight, and I guess I'll set it up since this was my subject. And one of the things that I think that we in this information age,
Mhm.
we've gotten conditioned to discount heart knowledge
Mhm.
or to discount the knowledge of the unseen, right? Because we get really caught up in what is tangible, measurable, and repeatable. Those are my favorite three words, by the way.
Right. Right.
uh, but we get caught up in that, and we say, okay, if it isn't tangible, measurable, repeatable, then it's not good. It's not right. But what I've learned is that people say trust your gut, and just to kind of get a little ahead of the subject here, that it is a scientific fact that your gut
Mhm.
is made up of the same type of material as your brain,
Yep.
right? So there are varying scientific schools of thought, varying scientific hypotheses that suggest that maybe your gut actually does a little bit of thinking for you.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about that, like people talk about the heart knowledge. When you're talking about heart knowledge, you're really talking about the gut, because people didn't know that the heart was not a thinking vessel, right? It does create an electromagnetic field, and I do believe that energy is sentient. So there may be some logic or some knowing that goes on in the heart, but I think that, not to get too far afield here, but we get caught up in our heads. We get in our own headspace, and then we say, okay, if it doesn't pass the litmus test of what I know to be true in my head, then I discount it. But what happens then is that the possibility you might miss something intuitive, you might miss something romantic
Yeah.
or platonic.
Mhm.
You might miss some things that are not quantifiable by our gray matter.
Yeah.
So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that tonight, because I I went through my atheistic phase,
Mhm.
and my atheistic phase said, well, if it doesn't make sense in my head, then it can't make sense at all. But I found that that's not entirely true. You
Mhm.
know that there are things that we know through intuition, through feeling, through and this is a big one. I've made this was something that I talked about back in my preaching days, and now I'm bringing it back. I'm actually returning back to this, and it's not the opposite of IQ, you know, intelligence quotient, but it basically rides shotgun with it, and that's EQ, you know,
Mhm.
your emotional quotient. Um, and I think that we've done the EQ a horrible disservice. So I want to try to bring that back to the fore and try to explain to folks why you can trust or when can you trust your your heart, your gut, right? And also when can you and can't you trust your head knowledge? Because there's a time and a place when your head knowledge may not be it may not hold the answer, may not hold the key.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, Aaron, I will kick it over to you, my brother.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this topic because I think it's really important. Um, it's interesting. First thing that pops into my head is, uh, tangible, measurable, repeatable, and then being logical, rational, um, analytical, all of that being head knowledge, I guess. Um, and yet the scientific method takes great leaps and bounds to negate all that stuff,
Yeah.
which kind of indicates that it can be unreliable. I think that's the first thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we all know intuition. I think it's generally accepted that intuition can be unreliable um, when it comes to knowing certain things. But we have a tendency, I think, to over depend upon head knowledge and rationale and intellect and thinking, and not realize that that can also, and very often is, inaccurate and wrong, and very often is influenced by our emotions. So I think you can't really talk about heart knowledge, or you mentioned emotional quotient, your
Mhm.
EQ.
Yep.
Um, you can't really talk about heart knowledge or intuition without including the emotions as well. And I know conventional wisdom will say that emotions are more likely to lead you astray, or they're more
Mhm.
likely to be false positives or give you inaccurate information about reality than, say, something, a well reasoned and logical argument. And I understand that. But when it comes to practical daily living, when it comes to like stuff of navigating the world out there, when it comes to like stuff that really needs to be scientific, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Yep.
your car's not going to explode on you, or your plane is not going to crash, or in my case, I gotta give a shout out to Big Pharma. I'm sorry, I know that probably pisses people off, but people want to like shit all over Big Pharma all the time. But I'm really thankful for the therapeutics they were able to give me in the hospital to get me better.
Yep.
So I'm just saying, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I think that's really important to our lives. But when it comes to our daily decisions, I don't know, man. I think our emotions, how we feel about something, might be more important when it comes to daily decisions and daily living than just our heads.
Yep.
Because we can be miserable at something. I know, I'm sure you've done this, Derrick. I know I've done this, miserable at something, whether it be a job, whether it be friendships, relationships,
Mhm.
um, physical health, whatever the case may be, where it's like I keep going in my head because it's the right thing to do, or it's the sensible thing to do, or seems to be the what's going to lead to the best outcomes. But I'm suppressing at the time. God, I hate this. This really sucks.
Yeah.
This is terrible. And so, even though kind of leading with the head uh, provides a certain sense of security, it doesn't necessarily provide for happiness. And we can't know if we're happy or if we're not happy. We can't know if we have peace or if we don't have peace. If we don't listen to what's going on inside of us at an emotional level. And that does come from the heart. I mean, and that is scientific. There actually is 40,000 neurons in the heart.
Yep.
And most communication taking place between the brain and the body is between the brain and the heart. And the heart is sending more information to the brain than what it's receiving. So when I work with clients, I always tell them, you think thoughts in your head, you tell stories in your head, but you feel in your body, and you're feeling in your body because of that vagus nerve and that connection to the heart and to the gut as well. And but it's sending information to the brain, and we kind of just shut that off. And I think we have some prejudices in our culture and in our society that says reason is better, rationale is better, logic is better. Your emotions, they'll just kind of be all over the place or lead you astray or whatever the case may be. And I don't know if that's the case. So I think it's important to not just think about a situation, but feel about a situation when you're trying to problem solve. Not how do you feel about that, but really feeling into a situation when you're trying to find guidance and your way through a situation or problem solve a situation, I think is really important. And I think extremely underrated.
There's an awesome scene from Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee's. It was technically his last movie, but he's teaching a student, and he tells a student, he says, "Don't think, feel."
Yeah.
And he says it's like a finger pointing at the moon, and the kid looks at the finger. He says, "If you concentrate on the finger, you miss all the heavenly glory of the moon."
Mm.
And so I'm thinking that, dealing with the cat. So we tend to want to think things when we should feel things, and I know, like in martial arts, feeling is a big thing. Like there's an exercise that we do in Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do, and it's called the Chi Sao. And so basically, you will engage someone touching your wrist to theirs. And so the idea is like you're exchanging and maneuvering based on the feel, right? And what that does is it teaches you how to feel your opponent in combat, because there are things that feelings can tell you that sight and sound can't,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
So and you taught me something new here, where you're talking about the number of neurons in the heart, because I know that, like, the heart, it's known that it produces an energy field that's about 6 feet in diameter. And this is how you could say, I get a negative vibe about someone, or I got a positive vibe about someone, because I believe the energy is sentient, energy is conscious, that when we get into the same space as someone with a bad vibe, that we get some feedback from that. So when we talk about feeling, you were saying that the heart is sending more information than it's receiving. That's a powerful thing. What is the impact that has on the brain, and what does that mean to your decision making? Because if you have 40,000 neurons in the heart alone, okay, does that mean that your heart is sending you more and better information than, say, your finger?
Mm.
Is it sending better or more information than your ear, than your eyes? There's something there, and I really think, I think that part of the problem with the information age is that we become too reliant. And oh boy, I'm kicking myself for what I'm about to say. That maybe what you feel is as important, if not more important, than what you think. In other words, because let me say this too, because is what you feel anecdotal or is it empirical? And I would surmise that even feeling is empirical data.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. So let me give you an example. I guess like I don't want to say one's better than the other,
Nope.
um, but I think it does give you a different perspective, and I think it's important to listen to those different perspectives. So it's like it's a data point, right? Or
Yeah.
it's a set of data points.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about life or decisions or direction, problem solving, that kind of stuff, you're going to have data points that are going to come from your own thoughts about it. You're going to have data points that are going to come from someone that's knowledgeable, someone that you trust about the situation. Hey, what do you think about this? They're going to give you information. Those are data points. And then listening to, excuse me, listening to our heart, listening to our emotions is another set of data points. And, people may scoff at this, but when I was in the hospital, it was just interesting to me that I had just had my birthday, like 53, and then the next thing I know, my first day of my next trip around the sun, and I'm in the hospital with this heart issue that I didn't even know I had, and part of the problem was my heartbeat was all over the place. There was no consistency. The heart rate variability was just insanely crazy. And of course, that was concerning to them. And yeah, I could have told you if I would have listened to my body. I'd been in that state for a while because I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. I had gone to the doctor a couple of times, thought maybe it was a respiratory thing. But I was laying there in bed, and heart rate's just kind of all over the place. And I've been thinking about the last couple of years, and when it comes to what I really want to give my life energy to in terms of work and service. So, of course, there's my family, my kids. It's always going to be extremely important. But in terms of what I do in service to others or work or for a living, I've been all over the place. And everything that I've been doing, I would have to say my heart has not been fully in. And I'm using the heart, metaphorically here. Yeah. Like I haven't been fully into it. My heart hasn't been fully into it. I've been only half engaged in everything that I'm doing, and yet have 10 different irons in the fire, right? Or 10 different ideas, and just kind of bouncing all over the place. So for me, I was able to recognize a pattern that was showing up in my physical body that was reflected in the way that I was thinking and feeling about various other aspects of my life. And so I was able to see, okay, I've got this pattern here. I also have this pattern here. Now that's a very Eastern medicine way of looking at things. That's not just, esoteric or spiritual. It's an Eastern way of looking at things, that they would say, looking at a person holistically, how are your relationships? How are your emotions? How's your work life? And how are these patterns then affecting either positively or negatively your health? And I could definitely see there was some consistency there. And so being in the hospital, then I was able to really, it was an amazing experience from the standpoint of I can clear the slate now, because at the end of the day, it's just me. I mean, you know what I mean? This is just about me and whether I'm here or not here. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a little bit of enough of a brush with death that it's like changes your perspective a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
And it's like, okay, what do I want to put my heart into? And in order to do that, in order to know that, I have to start listening to my heart. And I realized that, I've spent the last couple of years at least not listening to my heart. And that's new for me, because when I was, before, very much was listening to my heart and letting my heart lead and guide in directions, and had so overcorrected that I had quit listening to my heart altogether.
So, you and I have talked about this, like we talked about this on the air, off the air, that, that neither one of us is really doing what we really want to be doing.
Right.
Right. And I think that that's what happens when you rely too much on head knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
because you're looking at the numbers. You're looking at okay, does this make sense? Will this provide an income? Will this, pay the bills? All of these things, but we don't ask ourselves, is this going to satisfy me? Is this going um, to provide fulfillment?
Right.
And this is a big thing. Why I think this subject is so important, because I this is my belief. I think the majority of people go through life unfulfilled.
Mm-hmm. I do too.
That we find the thing that produces an income or produces a result, produces an outcome, and we get addicted to that,
Yeah.
because this is we I know that in whatever the case is, I can turn back to this.
Right.
I can rely on this. Whereas you might say, well, I want to sculpt, I want to paint, I want to write poetry, whatever, and that's where your heart is. So I would say this is a takeaway for me, is that in a worst case scenario, that you need to balance this out. That you need to say, okay, I'm a clinical psychologist, or I'm a software engineer, and I want to do X, Y, or Z, right? That I think it's important for our holistic balance,
Mm-hmm.
that we incorporate that which we love into that which what we feel like we have to do. That we marry our heart knowledge and our head knowledge. And I think that this is. Let me give a practical example, because both you and I have now experienced something similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Health wise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about that is that when you say, okay, I think I need to go to the doctor, that is almost never head knowledge. That's something in your body, something that's a little more intangible. I
Yeah.
don't feel right. Something is off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the same energy, or whatever the case may be. But it's the feeling, and it's like, if we were to totally um, dive into our heads, get into our headspace on this, we could easily dismiss what's going on by saying, "Oh, well, I'm okay. I'm making a big deal out of nothing." But it could be something significant, and so you and I both have had this experience where, okay, we felt something's off in me, as something is not uh, measuring up to what my expectations of myself are. And so now this becomes an exercise of the heart. It becomes an exercise of the gut. It becomes an exercise of something intangible, not something tangible. Because you know like, you could put a blood pressure cuff on and say, my blood pressure's high. This makes sense, right? But let's say you put on a blood pressure cuff, and I don't know where your blood pressure was in what you went through, but like in my case, um, my blood pressure numbers were okay. When I was going through a heart thing, my blood pressure numbers were okay. That wasn't what was driving it. But then when I went to the hospital back in August, or was that July? My blood pressure was sky high,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt it. I felt something off before I was able to detect something empirical. That
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and in my case, my blood pressure was fine. If anything, they were worried about my blood pressure getting too low.
Wow.
But what was the heart rate? Again, the heart rate variability was messed up,
Yeah.
and the little oximeter that you put on your finger wasn't detecting it or picking it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I knew. I mean, and I'd known for a while. I wish I would have listened to myself. But it's same thing. I mean, exactly what you said. It's like I don't feel right, but then that head knowledge just comes in and says, you're making too much out of
Yep.
nothing. No big deal. Um, And I know that I'm inclined to do that. So I've got to learn to listen
Well,
to my
and see,
body, listen to myself
for
better.
someone like you, it's even more challenging because you work in a clinical capacity, which means that physiology, understanding physiology, is part of your, what's in your work wheelhouse, right?
Right. Hmm.
So again, it's easy to get into our headspace and say, oh well, this doesn't meet the criteria of this diagnosis,
Right.
and you dismiss it, and then but what happens if we don't diagnose something, right? And this
Hmm.
is something that I've been let me inject my political thing here,
Yeah.
that if you don't diagnose what a problem is, you can never get to the root cause of what is driving the problem, and you can never get to a prognosis, or a diagnosis, or a prognosis. So again, when you're going through something, I think that if you feel a certain way, uh, hold on, let me make something really personal here. So like Maya and I, we talk about this, and she's always like, okay, if you feel a certain way, let's talk about it. Let's air that out. You know, and so that's something that we do as a maintenance tool for our relationship.
Sure.
Because if you don't talk about it, if you don't air it out, if you don't, then it just sits and simmers, right? And it becomes something more than what it should be. But if you say, okay, I feel this way, and I think we need to address this, and we do address this, and we find out what the root cause is, and we address it, and we apply a remedy to it.
Hmm.
Now we can go on. But what happens is a lot of us never really, I think that we're so quick to dismiss our heart, so quick to dismiss our gut feelings,
Hmm.
that what happens is things sit and simmer. It's on the back eye of the stove,
Yeah.
and it's simmering. It's simmering. But how many of you know that you can't simmer a pot indefinitely? Eventually, what you have is either going to reduce or burn,
Right.
right? So you have to watch the pot and understand what it is what it is that you're trying to achieve. And the only way that you're going to achieve this is through heart knowledge. Because if you think about this, like cooking is as much an art as a science, right? So
Hmm.
you could say, okay, a pot boils at, or something boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but uh, it could be ruined at a lower temperature. So how do you know that? Do you know that by empirical head knowledge, or do you know that by the number of times you cook this dish?
Hmm.
And so that's the thing. It's like we can't dismiss what we feel. That's the
Right.
point that I'm getting at.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. um, and I do think the intuitive ways of knowing are important. So, for example, like one of the things that they were looking at when they started, with this whole brain in your gut thing, where they noticed, recognize the neuron structure that's in the gut, and one of the things they were able to do is tap into that information in terms of like lie detecting,
Mhm.
and they found that it was a far more accurate lie detector test than the common what they have
Mm,
now. I
yeah,
forget what it's called. Um,
polygraph.
yeah, polygraph. Yeah, thank you. It's far more accurate, right? And I don't know about you, but I would probably venture to guess that the vast majority of the time when I've had a gut check about something, whether it's being involved with somebody an investment,
Mhm.
uh, business decision, whatever, and I've ignored that gut check. In other words, something doesn't feel right here, and I've ignored that gut check.
Yep.
Almost every time I've regretted it. I don't know if there's been a time that I haven't regretted it, right?
Wow.
And yet I'll still catch myself. Not listening to that little bit of a gut check. Now, the flip side of that is, and I think we saw this a lot, and I don't know, I don't know what was going on with these people, but I'm sure you saw this in your ministry where people had the gift of discernment and they were always getting a discernment about somebody or something or some situation or
Yeah. Word of
um,
knowledge, word of wisdom. Yeah.
well, this was more not so much word of knowledge or word of wisdom. This was more well, I have a discernment about that person that
Okay.
there's something wrong in their
Yeah.
spirit.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, uh, there's something wrong in the atmosphere today, Pastor.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I don't know if those people were really listening to anything that remotely has to do with anything that we're talking about, or if they were just kind of crazy. But vast majority of the time, that stuff was just flaky. Even back then, it's just like, God, it's so flaky. I remember we had one guy that anytime there was a demon near or somebody with a bad spirit or whatever, he'd get a feeling right up here on the back of his neck.
Mm.
And I'm just like, yeah, Dennis, I'm not going to trust the, goosebumps on the back of your neck. Sorry, dude. And I think so for me, I think that was part of the turnoff, was because watching other people, I guess there's an element of judgment to that, really, if I'm honest about it. Watching other people like, man, that's so flaky the way you're using your discernment or the way you're using your intuition. Like
Mhm.
it's just flaky. Or people that will just come up with these, what I think are just crazy conspiracy theories, right? Or ideas that are just completely out of touch, in my opinion, with anything close to reality, but they just know that they know.
Yeah.
And I think that is so distasteful to me. I hate that so much. Like I have such an emotional charge on that with other people that
Yeah.
I try to make sure I don't do that same thing. By just calling it intuition or just having a sense or God told me or whatever the case may be. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense at all?
No,
I feel
you're making perfect sense.
so I think maybe in judging that and then saying, because it's a false equivalence, because I never went down any of those pathways. Anyway, it's kind of like I knew right off the bat. That's
Yeah.
crazy. I'm not going to accuse somebody that I'd never met of being a lizard alien and drinking adrenochrome just because I saw some video on YouTube and it bore witness with my spirit about that person. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's just so gross and disgusting and reprehensible.
Yeah.
Like when this whole election cycle, I keep going back to 2020, and when all that stuff was coming out, I was offended because I'm like, we're accusing people of horrible, horrible things with not a shred of evidence. And the only thing we got is I watched this on YouTube and it really bore witness with my spirit.
Right.
And then we connect it with some other thing that didn't make sense. Like I remember talking to somebody, I had a bad experience once with, the mainstream media that lied about me or lied about somebody that I knew. So therefore I know they lie. So therefore I know they're lying here. And it's just like
Right.
it's just like, golly. So I don't know if that's just unstable. I kind of tend to think it's just
Yeah.
unstable.
So let's talk about that for a second because you align that with discernment, right? And so people say, oh, well, he has a discerning spirit, right? And I used to listen to Christian people who they said had a discerning spirit. And so whenever someone had a discerning spirit, using my air quotes here,
Right.
whenever they had a discerning spirit, it was always something negative about someone.
It's true.
It was never anything positive. This person is an empath. Or this person is generous. This person is loving. This person is caring. This person has compassion. None of that. It's always been that discernment has always been negative.
Yeah.
So we need to be discerning about what we discern, right? And I say that kind of glibly, but that's the reality. We need to be discerning about our discernment. In other words, first of all, how to discern between head knowledge and heart knowledge. I think that that's key. The second thing is, how do we unpack or bifurcate our head knowledge, right? In other
Mhm.
words, you said this early on in the show, not all head knowledge is good knowledge, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So if all head knowledge is not good knowledge, in other words, we might know something because these are the facts, but the facts may not be applicable to this particular situation. Therefore, that head knowledge in this particular case is invalid,
Mhm.
right? So we have to learn how to discern between what is applicable or not applicable, and dare I say this? This is going to sound very judgmental, but we assign some good and bad to that,
Mhm.
right? And say, okay, this is definitely head knowledge. It definitely has merit, but it's not good in this particular context.
Mhm.
Okay, so give you an example. Use something that you just said. Someone says, okay, the media, the mainstream media, reported incorrectly about this. Therefore, the entirety of the mainstream media is fucked up because of this. Well, what you're doing is you're making a critical decision
Mhm.
based on a single data point.
Yeah.
And so it may be absolutely true that the mainstream media said something defaming about you. Maybe absolutely correct. Or maybe it said something about someone else. But that doesn't mean that the mainstream media is incorrect about everything.
Right.
And that's one of these areas where I think head knowledge and heart knowledge, where we need to really dovetail this, because in cases like this, news outlets exist to give us some overarching knowledge about things that we don't have, give us some insight, right?
Mhm.
Now, if we just simply dismiss it out of hand and
Mhm.
say, well, it doesn't matter what the mainstream media is wrong no matter what. If we assign that value to it, then that means that they could come up and say something seriously wrong, something seriously may impact all of our lives, but now you've chosen to dismiss it because you made a decision with inferior data points.
Mhm.
So let me say this about that when we're in the process of decision making, whether it be financial decisions, relationships decisions, where we send our kids to school, or how we interface with our neighbors, that in order to, let me say this, we cannot afford to dismiss any data points.
Right.
That when a data point comes, whether it is intellectual or whether it is intuitive,
Right.
that we owe it to ourselves to put all of those data points into our decision matrix and say, okay, I'm going to base my decision on this.
Mhm.
And I think that if we do that, then we do well, right? But again, what happens is, we either humans tend to be very binary, and we say, okay, I'm going to make this decision based on my gut and my gut alone. My gut has never failed me.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to make this decision based on the knowledge that I have about the situation, and I'm going to exclude what my gut or what my heart says.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever we do that at our own peril. You know, that we need to, in order to do holistic decision making, that we have to consider every possible data point. And that means that sometimes the data point that we have may not be the empirical.
Right.
So let me throw one more out here before I kick it back to you, because I'm of the mindset, and I'm of the mindset that Jesus as a person never existed.
Right.
That's me, right?
Hmm.
Because the empirical data is against it.
Hmm.
But one of our friends, a mutual friend, recently said, "Hey, I need Jesus. I know I need Jesus." Okay,
Hmm.
that says that this person has a heart experience, a gut experience, and even though I believe what I believe based on empirical evidence, I cannot discount if two things. One, if I'm going to be intellectually honest, first, I can't discount his experience, and
Right.
two, if I'm going to say I love him, which means I have empathy and compassion for him, then that means I cannot dismiss what he says. So if he says that he needs Jesus, if that is his testimony, then that is his testimony. It doesn't necessarily have to be mine, but I can't dismiss it out of hand. And so that was a growth experience that I had just this week. Just
Yeah.
this week.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I think exactly that's exactly kind of where we started. Like it's a it's a set of data points, right?
Yeah.
That um, if we're not aware of, we won't. We're just missing out. I think we make. I think the best informed decisions are all often. Sorry, the most informed decisions are often the best decisions. And if we don't know to listen to our heart, or we don't know to listen to our emotions or our feelings, or heck, even in more intuitive ways of knowing, like dreams. I mean, I've certainly had dreams that were informative for
Mhm.
me. I've had dreams that were predictive for me. That doesn't mean every dream is informative or predictive. And I would drive
Yeah.
myself crazy. I mean, completely crazy if I thought that, because if any bad dream I had, I'd be like, oh my God, what is this?
And you can't be dismissive of the dreams, because you know if you dismiss this dream and you say, oh well, I'm just out of my mind. Dreams speak to us. I
Hmm.
think dreams tap into a subconscious realm of our energy, right? and
For
and
sure.
so you can't just dismiss that. Or if
Right.
someone says, I had a dream about something, you can't just dismiss that.
Right.
It's a data point.
Exactly. Exactly. But if you don't know that it's a data point, then you won't weigh that or consider that or take take that in a way that can be helpful and sorry, helpful and beneficial.
Yep. And that's the thing. Like, holistically, holistically, I think that everything that we take in has meaning.
Hmm.
And we need to learn to listen to our hearts as well as we listen to our heads.
Hmm.
And for those who are more of the emotional bent, that we need to listen to our head as much as we listen to our heart. In other words,
It's true.
uh, I never forget this. It's like, I was at a conference some years back, and the preacher who was preaching, he said God gave you a brain for a reason. Use it.
Yeah.
And that was very counterintuitive to what I have been taught, because basically I was taught that if you have faith, you don't need facts.
Right.
But this one preacher said, listen, you got a brain for a reason. Use it.
Right.
And so I'm recalling all of that now, and to say that that whenever I have a decision to make, so like, let me give you an example. Warren Buffett once said something about a railroad stock that he recommended. He made it a buy, and people were asking, okay, well, Warren, what are the metrics behind this? And he said, I don't have metrics. It just feels right.
Hmm.
And that stock was Norfolk Southern, which he wound up buying. Berkshire Hathaway wound up buying a big part of it, and it turned out to be very profitable. This was one where the numbers didn't make sense, but he said it just felt good. And what we have to learn is how to accept and process that which feels good,
Right.
or to eschew or reject
Right.
that which doesn't feel good. Because you might be in a situation where all the numbers look good. If you're painting by numbers, this looks aces. It's perfect. But
Yeah. Yeah.
your gut, your heart is telling you, this isn't good.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how to discern, and also, discerning, rightly dividing, however you want to say it. You have to learn how to discern.
Hmm. Yeah, and it is a learning process, and I don't think there's not a, every situation is going to be different.
Yep.
Every person's going to be different. You bring up a good point. You and I tend to be more heady, if you will, but there are a lot of people they're more emotional. They
Yep.
make their decisions almost 100% on how they feel. And if you had two people come together in this conversation, they might be saying the other thing, like, hey, we need to listen to our logic and our reason.
Yeah.
Listening to our intuition and emotions has gotten us in a world of hurt, on a number of different occasions. And so everybody's going to be different. Everybody connects to the world different. Everybody relates to the world different. Everybody perceives the world differently. Everybody has a unique set of life experiences that they've incorporated into their sense of self. And so that brings us back to something that you and I emphasize quite a bit. Like, there's no definitive right or wrong for everybody.
Right.
And so we need to be careful with that, that we don't. Another thing that I've noticed, I'm shifting gears here, but something else that I've noticed, Derrick, about myself, because I've really been self-reflecting, as you might imagine. I do that around my birthday anyway, but this was on steroids.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things I've noticed is that I still, at 53 years old, have a tendency to look out at other people or other sources for, God, I hate to say it like this, I'm very vulnerable, but at times, I don't do this all the time, but there are certain times and situations where I'm looking outside myself for almost a parental affirmation. I'm on the right track, or that it's okay.
Yeah.
One of the things having with one of my kids is born with no hearing in his left ear at all. And so one of the things that I've noticed over the years that he does when we're out, particularly if we're in a noisy restaurant or something like that, and someone will say something to him, and he'll look at one of us, he'll respond, and then he'll look at one of us like, did I get that right? And so because of the way he had difficulty processing sound and stuff, he got used to looking to us to make sure he was handling the situation right, or heard the situation right, or was doing right in the situation.
Yeah.
And I realized that with certain things, that there's still that need inside of me. Again, this isn't universal. This isn't in every situation, but particularly if it's going to be a risk, particularly if it's going to be somewhat out of the box, it's like I'm looking at, and it doesn't have to be someone I know. It could be could be a scientific article, or it could be, you know what I'm saying? It could be
Yeah.
anything where it's like I'm looking for that parental affirmation. Oh, this is okay. And I think part of the challenge for me in my own growth in this stage of my life is there are certain things where it's like, okay, I don't need that parental affirmation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how much we do that when it comes to second guessing ourselves. So, in other words, intuitively, I may feel good about this.
Man.
Reasonably and rationally, I may also feel good about this, but I'm just enough uncertain that I'm looking in the environment somewhere for that parental affirmation. And
Mhm.
if I get a check, in other words, a disapproving look, I'm speaking metaphorically, but
Yeah.
article that doesn't jive with that, or someone I really look up to that doesn't think exactly the same way, doesn't give me that affirmation, I have a tendency to back off and start second guessing myself.
No, and that you stepped into something really key here, that parental affirmation thing, right?
Mhm.
That I know that, like, when and I'm gonna say this, and you guys don't get it all twisted, but a lot of times, like, if I'm looking for affirmation on something, Aaron, I come to you
Mhm.
because I'm saying, okay, what do you think of this? Is this right? I think this is right. What do you think? Right? Um, but then I have people that I know that if I present this to them, chances are the likelihood is that they're going to be like, "Oh, Derrick, that's bullshit, man. Ah, why are you coming to me with that?" And but every now and then, I'll share something with you, and you'll be like, "Oh, I don't know about that, bro." Or I'll submit it to the person that I know that's going to give me the negative feedback, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I get it. I'm with you there. I'm
Mhm.
tracking." Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so I think that it's not. I think that that's natural that we look for that parental kind of affirmation. Mama, daddy, is this right?
Yep.
Does this make sense? And we look for that. And and again, when we start talking about heart knowledge versus head knowledge, and this is
Yep.
another thing I want to say this. I want to throw this out here too, because um, when people talk about biology, they're always saying, okay, men teach the logical part of life, women teach the emotional part of life, and I don't think that that's always the case. You know, because, for example, like, both my mother and my wife, I think that they're both very emotionally driven, but I also think that they're highly logical.
Mhm.
That they have a very robust thinking model,
Mhm.
right? So the thing is that I'm not always going to get an emotional response from either of them. Even though they say mothers, they give you the emotional parts, and then to flip the script, my dad is not always going to give the logical response. Sometimes he's going to feed in his emotional quotient, what his EQ is on the
Right.
matter.
Right.
And again, I've said this earlier in the show, and I'll say it again as we're coming up to the end, is that I think that really, if you're going to be a whole person, that you really need to marry your IQ with your EQ.
Yeah. I agree.
That you need to marry your logic and your reason. You need to learn how to discern which makes the most sense given a particular set of circumstances. And we can't
Right.
always say that in this particular situation I'm going to do this. Sometimes your response will be counterintuitive to what the situation is, and you have to give yourself permission
Yeah.
to act that out.
Mhm.
So, I'm just like, okay, head knowledge versus heart knowledge, which is superior? I've come to the conclusion that neither is superior. That both have their place
Yep.
in all situations, but there are some situations, and again, this, let me say this too, for everybody that's listening, is that this is native to who you are and native to your specific set of circumstances. There is no cookie cutter measure that says when logic supersedes emotion
Right.
or vice versa. So
Yeah. No, I agree. I completely agree. I don't think it's helpful to try to elevate one above the other or say this is always right. I mean, there may be situations where it is absolutely your heart is telling you right, your emotions is telling you right, and you may find yourself in complete contradiction with what your brain is telling you, logic and reason is telling you. And in that situation, it may be you need to go with your heart. And then in another situation, it may be actually your brain is telling you the truth in that situation. So, it'd be nice if there was just a formula for all of it.
yeah,
It would really be nice. I think that's one of the appeals to religion is it just gives us a formula for everything.
yeah.
And so then we
And,
don't have to worry about it.
and it doesn't, because like I was thinking about this, that like when at the turn of the 20th century, there was or in the early 20th century, there was a debate between the farthest advancement of Newtonian physics and quantum physics, and so there was a constant debate between these two, and what was interesting was that there were things that Einstein said they didn't feel right to him, and there were things that people like Niels Bohr and what is Derrick, that they were saying that this doesn't feel right. There was a lot of feeling in the scientific community,
Mm-hmm.
and this feeling led to some of the most extraordinary hypotheses and theories that have ever been presented to mankind. So the point is that no matter how great your head knowledge is, you have to leave room for your heart knowledge, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to also leave room to believe that maybe the heart knowledge will displace what you know to be true in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do that, I mean, imagine if science didn't do that. I mean, I always think about this like Schrodinger and his cat.
Yeah.
People say Schrodinger just really hated cats. And I believe that in examining his hypotheses and theories, that Schrodinger really didn't like cats. That was a thing. So the whole experiment in uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
came from a man's dislike of cats. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, you can't just dismiss something out of hand because you say, okay, well, this is how I feel. Well, or you can't say I dismiss this out of hand because, well, this is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to, and you and I have talked about this a lot. I believe that if you're going to be a truly critical thinker, you have to be able to hold two disparate thoughts, two disparate theories or hypotheses in your hand, examine them, but consider them both.
Right.
Because if you're unwilling to consider both of them, then basically what you're doing is you're creating for yourself an echo chamber.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to to hold both thoughts simultaneously, then I think that you can get to whatever objective truth really is.
Yep. I agree. I think on that note, that's a good place
Good
to land
place to
the
land the
plane.
plane.
Yeah. So
Well, I tell you what, man, it is good seeing you.
thank
I
you.
miss you. Glad that you're okay and
Thank you.
all of that. And just keep on getting better. And
Yeah,
that's it, man.
that's the plan. Thank you for hosting this again, as always. And thanks to everybody for watching and coming to our TED Talk. And hopefully it was helpful and beneficial for people.
Yep, absolutely. I think that this is something that if you didn't listen to it live, go back and listen to it, because I think that this is something that will really help a lot of people, because I think that a lot of us, we tend to get stuck in how we think about things.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a very liberating talk.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So that being said, thank y'all for listening. And
See you
maybe
next. See you
yep,
next
see you
Friday.
next week. Yep.
Peace.
All
Hair
right.
grease. We're out of
Peace
here.
and hair grease. Love you, brother.
Love you too, man.
All right.